a bit unusual. I studied law, I did a PhD in law, and in 2012, finally I submitted my PhD and I was invited to do my PhD Viva, which is the oral exam. And I knew one thing for sure. This was like, for me, the moment of great change. And the story of my academic legal life was going to end. Only I knew it. I hadn't told anybody as yet. And what I really wanted to do, and I knew this from the very beginning when I started my law degree, I wanted to cook, but I actually wanted to feed people. This gave me the greatest pleasure. I felt my most powerful when I was able to serve someone something I'd cooked. In some ways, it was my way of showing affection and love and being able to give them something that took them home. For me, food was always about giving people that emotional moment when they ate the food. And I knew that, I'm not going to become a lawyer. I'm going to cook. I want to do something. But at that time, in England, in fact, anywhere in the West, everywhere you looked, it was male chefs that you saw on television, and on in the media. It was always about men who were cooking in kitchens. The greatest irony of it all is that in every South Asian home you go to, you will invariably find a woman. But in every South Asian restaurant you go to, not just in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, but almost everywhere in the world, you will usually find a man cooking in the kitchen. And it was, a desire for me that I wanted to cook, but there was no road or route in front of me. I happened to then have this conversation with my neighbor who told me, there's this thing called secret supper clubs that you can do, which is to host a dinner in your own house as if it's a restaurant. And that's when I knew I'd found a way forward. I'd found a way to serve food of my home, of my heritage, without, having to go through the stress of, where would I go? How could I do this business? Because there were no examples, nobody around who was doing anything at that time. And then when I started investigating supper clubs, I got an even bigger shock because I realized that it supper clubs are being done by a lot of people of East Asian origin, Singaporeans and Cantonese food from Hong Kong. You didn't have any Indians doing a supper club. Now this really worried me because I was concerned that people think they know Indian food in this country. There's been a long history. Indian restaurants have always been around forever and ever, it seems. And people have an idea of what is Indian food, which is not necessarily what is Indian food. Now, I was worried that, if I served my nargisi kofta, my chicken chop, my luchi aloo dum, niramish, and it didn't resemble the kind of korma and sweet kind of, things that people were passing off as korma. A lot of made up dishes like balti, which is a bucket, and also chicken tikka masala. Everything was full of ghee and cream in this country. Even with all these setbacks that nobody knew what Indian food was really, I was concerned. I'm talking about 2012, so many years from now. It was before people things have changed, and there's a lot of regional food now, but at that time there wasn't. And I just decided that I was going to risk it and I was going to do a supper club, but I lacked confidence and I lacked money, both. The money was just, thank God, I just needed to buy one big pot to make biryani. I had got 50 pounds from an aunt for Eid, which was quite a big thing because, once you reach a certain age, no one gives you any money for Eid. And I bought myself a pot, and that's how I started. But I remembered my own heritage, and I knew that you don't start anything new without an auspicious way to start, that you do something good for others. So the first few supper clubs I did in my house was all for hunger charities. These were organizations that were British that were feeding people in war zones, in famines, in where there were floods. And, I was contributing the entire money from the supper club towards these projects because I felt that this way I was feeding the hungry first. So in those war zones, in those feeding camps where there was famine, and they were fighting to save the lives of children. Through my supper club, I was donating the entire money. And I felt this is like the right thing to do. This is just the way that you should start. And of course, this makes me sound a bit, conventional, traditional, But then I was also not conventional and traditional in something else, which is I lied to my husband because I knew he would hate this. I'm married to an academic. He likes students but doesn't like people. So I thought if he doesn't know, there's no harm done. So I waited till he went away. He was to do a lot of kind of research trips. He's an academic, so I knew exactly when he was traveling. And while he was away, I did supper clubs. And it was very, very exciting because I had all these people around in my house. And in the beginning, I was, of course, doing all of this for charity and raising funds and talking about, the work that the charities were doing. But then, I then got the confidence that, yes, maybe I can, do it like not like a business, but like a profession. I can start cooking. And I wasn't alone in this entire journey. I had already made friends with some amazing women who I had met who were from South Asia, who were nannies and cleaners, around my area. And these were part of this journey. They were with me throughout. But then, as all stories like this have to come to an end. It wasn't that I was caught. My children complained a lot. And I thought, enough is enough. I cannot do this to my entire family to cause so much disruption. So then I took up an offer at that time. It was too exciting and we were loving cooking. And this time it wasn't just me. I had other women who were involved in this. And I could see the transformation in their lives. It was giving them a lot of self-respect and honor, and they were feeling less isolated, as immigrants in this country. And I took up an offer to do a pop-up, which is like, you pay a very small rent and you go into a kitchen in a very, very, very trendy pub in Soho, which is, very much part of London lifestyle, where people go out in the evenings, people go out drinking. It's very trendy. And I failed completely because, no one wanted to eat Indian food. It was very unusual to have, people don't want to eat Indian food. They think this is something heavy and greasy, and you don't have this when you have a pint of beer with your friends. It wasn't seen as cool enough, wasn't trendy enough. Everybody over there looked like aging rock stars. There was like they were like bikers outside, heavily tattooed men, lots of kind of piercing. They were not interested in my food. I was not willing to lose. I did try. And one of the things that I'll always remember is that I tried to get people to eat. I thought, let's give the best thing that we have, which is deep fried samosa. These guys will eat it because they will love this whole idea of something that is, who doesn't like samosa? I tried to give them samosas, and I remember one guy turned around and told me, I don't want your curry, love. That day we sold nothing. And I remember crying when I went up. I had tried the whole day to sell just one dish and I had failed. And I knew that I'll come back tomorrow, even though I was totally crushed. But then my kismat was going to change dramatically. I had, in this country, the most well-respected 70-year-old food critic of the Evening Standard, which is like the free newspaper you get in the tube stations. Huge London following, very iconic critic, with a lot of kind of gravitas, and people took her very seriously. She turned up for her 70th birthday. I didn't recognize her because I don't know what she looks like. I don't know how any food critics look like at that time. And then she wrote this absolutely amazing review, which came out on a Thursday. And the queue was outside. The feeling of having achieved this spectacular, dream, we were suddenly someone big. There were queues of people, and the no curry love, he stood for 3 hours to get a table to eat. I never gave him a bill. I told him, this that you sat on my table and ate is enough. He told me, please forgive me. I still might have, but I will not take your money. I couldn't get myself to take his money. But it's just a lesson. I could have left that night. I could have walked away. And my dreams would have been finished. But I picked myself up to fight another day. And I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I did. And it was really, then very successful, and we were like buzzing and packed and everything. And then, of course, as all things happen, something else happened in my life and I had to stop. But this time with my son, I discovered, I'm typical Indian mother. I checked my son's notes and thought he's got no notes. And I told him, do you take notes in class? And I realized he doesn't. He has GCSEs and he's going to fail. So I thought, fine, I'm going to do the very ummy thing and I'm going to close my business, go home and sit and write his geography and history notes. Otherwise, this boy is going to fail. And I said, with very short notice, I was saying goodbye to everybody, saying, I'm so sorry, I have to leave, I'm so sorry. And then I told this gentleman who was eating regularly in the pub in the pub that I'm so sorry, sir, I have to leave and I hope you enjoyed it. He said, what are you doing? Where are you going? I said, I'm going home because my son is going to fail his exams if I don't go and make his notes. He told me, your story cannot end like this. And I said, yes, it does. When you are from, my culture and my background, your children's exams are very important. This is how your story ends. He told me, no, tonight, I'm going to talk to someone. Tomorrow, you're going to go and have a look at this space I have. I'm a landlord. And I thought, this sweet man, he's being so nice to me. Just to make him happy, I'll go. So I went, it was just behind the pub. But when I walked in, something hit me in there. I saw this as another moment of change in my life. And I said, no, I'm going to do it. I had no money. It was very tough. I went through a lot of struggle to open the restaurant. But we did it. We opened an all-female restaurant run by housewives, home cooks. The average age of a woman cooking was 50. We just opened and it was, we had a lot of loyal people who had come to supper clubs in my house. But then, just like the Fame Ashler Game Changer, I got an email from out of the blue from the executive producer, Brian McGinn of Chef's Table. And he said, I know your story and I think you're fascinating and we would like you to be the first British chef on Chef's Table. Initially, I thought this is a hoax. I thought this can't be real. How does he even know who I am? But there had been stories coming out in the media. People had been fascinated by the story that I was this housewife, with just all women cooking in the kitchen. And we had opened a restaurant, very, very unusual for that time. And eventually I spoke to him, and to my great delight, he was very open-minded, very open-hearted, like, what do you want to do? I said, first thing I want to do is I want to tell the stories of my women too. This cannot just be the story of myself. And he told me, we've never had any other chef asking us to show their team. But I know I stand on the shoulders of giants. These women who have come from deprived backgrounds, lack of education, abusive relationships, they had now become so powerful. They were lifting me up. But they were great. And, for those who've seen the episode, you will see, not only were they featured in it, they have their names on the wall next to their faces. This was very important because in our culture, Naam is name, but Naam is also fame. And I was someone who didn't have, a godfather or someone, there was no nepotism, no connection. I didn't have a mentor. My strength came from this team of women. So I really, we really all just cooked the way that we knew how to cook. We cooked with patience, we cooked with love. And this term, ibadat, we serve with ibadat, which is an Urdu term, but it is the way and the grace with which we serve people. It is meditation, it is prayer. And that's what was part of, our tradition in this restaurant. And yes, a lot of people would ask me, wow, you have, a team of unprofessionals. And I would tell them, they have life experience. In their 60s, they have lost and won and lost and won. From teenage times, they have served food to people. They have the kind of experience I want. I want people who know how to cook with patience, with sabr, who step back and cook because their only experience was not to impress, but they cooked for people they loved. This is the experience I wanted. So for me, this was the professionalism that, I really needed. And, in my kitchen, there was no hierarchy. We were all equal. This is very different from this kind of, regimented kitchens that you have in the West, where people are paid different wages. And in most cases, women of color, women are paid less. There's so much hierarchy, you won't find women being able to cut through that middle section. They stay in that place because it's the men who dominate the top. And I always, I can make this description, which, you will all recognize. This for us is our second innings. None of us are going to get a chance to come out and bat again. This is our final time. And for us, we hit every ball out of the park. So that kind of drive and ambition and desire to succeed that comes from my team of women in their 60s is unbeatable. We cannot lose because their attitude is every day we will win. Every day is our victory. The desire to succeed and perfect comes from them, from within. And I just, always think of a poem, of Rabindranath Tagore, I'm half Bengali. This thing of Akla Chalore, that you light the path, not for yourself, but for others who come behind you. And for all of us, the whole team, we know the world is watching us. We need to succeed so that the legacy we leave is that you can be powerful and you can be good. You do not need to hurt. You do not need to crush other people to become successful. And this is the greatest legacy of Darjeeling Express. Our journey is so unconventional. We've had no one supporting us, from the industry. I have no network. But we were so good, the world couldn't ignore us. And our passion and desire, people saw and they felt it and they tasted it in the food. And I just think that, never ever give up. When you hit the hurdle and you fall, stand up because this is your test. As we say, this is your imtihan. You need to rise above every hurdle. And in removing the hurdle, you remove the hurdle for the person coming behind you. And this is what I want to do. I want to, in my lifetime, see women surpass me. I want to see women with great glory in the kitchen. I want to see honor back for South Asian women who cook in their houses, who have never been paid, who have never been given the glory they deserve. They have nourished and nurtured generations. Our time has come now. And this would be Darjeeling Express's biggest legacy if people will remember us as housewives, home cooks, but at some point we ruled London.